Hello, everyone. Tonight's show, which I totally wash my hands of, is really scary. So if you have sensitive children, maybe you should tuck them into bed early tonight instead of writing us angry letters tomorrow. Thanks for your attention.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Springfield Googleplex, the movie podcast for Simpson fans, brought to you by ThatShelf.com. Every episode, we talk about a movie parodied on The Simpsons. Maybe it was The Simpsons that introduced us to the film, or maybe when we finally saw it, we realized, oh, hey, that's where that Simpson joke came from. Regardless, each week we pick one that one of us hasn't seen or hasn't seen in a while, watch it, and come together to discuss. I'm your host, Adam Scholes, and joining me as always is the Fritz to my Frankenstein. I don't know who gets the short end of the stick there. My co-host, Nate Storing. How are you today, old friend?
I'm doing pretty well. I was at the coffee shop this morning, and I look over at this table that's in the corner, and there were 4 women wearing matching leopard print tracksuits. So that's how I know that we're still in spooky season.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Yes. It's funny. We've pre-recorded pretty much our entire season, almost 6 months in advance, except for this episode. So this is one of the few episodes that we're recording that is actually kind of in line with when it's about to be released. So yeah, we're still in spooky season. We're loving it. And, it wouldn't be spooky season if we didn't spend an episode with our very own mistress of horror, Dede Crimmins. Dede, thank you for coming back. I think you're our first three-peat guest.
What?
So, yeah,
That's
exactly.
Excellent. So I'm your Alec Baldwin as to SNL.
Exactly. Yeah. 2 more and you get to wear a jacket.
Oh man, that's excellent. You can take my measurements now. No, thanks for having me. You guys reached out and I was without hesitation, 2 of my favorite things are Simpsons and horror, and then speaking about them. So yay, thanks.
Well, we're so happy to have you because this week we're indulging in part 2 of our horror hangover with James Whale's Frankenstein, the original Universal Monsters classic, which you might remember from such Simpsons episodes as Season 2's Bart Gets an F, Season 8's Bart After Dark, Season 9's Bart Carney and Lost Our Lisa, Season 11's 8 Misbehavin', Season 12's Worst Episode Ever, and every Treehouse of Horror except 6, 7, and 12. So
yeah, that's what makes this one of the most referenced movies on The Simpsons, is that it's in every Treehouse of Horror, sometimes multiple times. Lots of creepy credits that are Dr. Frankenwelker or whatever. So yeah, it's a fun one.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into that, we just sort of want to catch up with you, Dede. We haven't spoken to you since, I guess it would have been last year when we had you on for Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh, yeah.
A naming convention I am quite glad we've moved away from. But there's been quite a few big crossover horror hits this year. Would you say that this has been a decent year for mainstream horror?
I mean, it's definitely been an amazing year for horror. I feel like many years are really good years for horror, and we either forget about it so we can talk about it in a different way, or it doesn't crack through the mainstream, you were saying. But the number of conversations I've had this year of being yep, Sinners is a horror movie, even if you like it. It's been pretty incredible, to the point where, because Weapons just hit streaming, and so many of my friends who don't really like horror are watching it and texting me being oh wait, this is really good. I'm yeah, I know. And so I'm watch Bring Her Back, and everyone's what? I'm that was supposed to be the big horror movie this year. And the fact that it's kind of fallen off of our consciousness is, if anything, the sign of a really good year for horror.
Absolutely.
And have you had a chance to catch up with Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein what do you want to call it? Remake? Reboot?
New adaptation.
New adaptation is probably the
adaptation.
best. Yeah.
Yeah, new adaptation of the novel, I think, is the closest thing. Yes, I've seen it multiple times at this point. I saw it at a press screening a little while ago, and I was well, this is beautiful. And now I was literally getting sucked in. I chimed on a little late, and I told Adam I was watching it again this morning, and I got sucked in, and it was about to be the creation scene, and I was just apparently clocks didn't exist to me for a little while.
Yeah. I feel like this movie's been super controversial, weirdly.
Oh, yeah?
Well, it's just, I feel like it's a really love it or hate it thing. I've seen so many people dunking on it, but I watched it Friday night and I loved it. I thought it was great. And I don't really get why people are so down on it. So I'm not a huge Guillermo del Toro fan. I love his presence in the film industry. I love listening to interviews with Guillermo del Toro. Probably my other favorite movie of his is Hellboy, right?
Yeah.
Which probably tells you that, like, I'm not a big Guillermo del Toro fan, because I think most people would probably rank many other movies above that. I kind of struggle with the tone of his movies, and I thought this content was, like, so perfect for what he does, because the book is big and romantic and tragic and all of that, and I think he captures it super well. But I'm curious, like, what did you think of, again, it's like, it's a completely different way to adapt this story than the movie we're mostly going to be talking about, but what did you think?
The first time I saw it, I was like, it's fine. I do love Del Toro, and I love when he's over the top, and I'm totally okay with him making things that are, to like paraphrase Crimson Peak, like they're movies with monsters, not monster movies. The first time I saw it, I was just like, I was having trouble wrapping my brain around it, and I think it's because I spent the entire time being like, was this in the book? Was this in the movie? Was this in another one? And I just couldn't relax and sink into it. And then watching it again, I kind of was able to shut off my brain and let it be what it was. And that's when I really was like, oh, this is awesome. Yeah. And just like paying attention to the score that much more. Like, good God, like thinking music. We need more thinking music in this world. And visually, it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, totally. With all that being said, let's now tuck into The Simpsons. And let's start by chatting about Treehouse of Horror II, Season 3, Episode 7, directed by Jim Reardon, written by Al Jean, Mike Reiss, Jeff Martin, George Meyer, John Swartzwelder, and Sam Simon. Basically a who's of the greatest of the early era of The Simpsons. Original air date, and this is kind of exciting, October 31st, 1991, one of those rare Treehouse of Horror that actually aired on Halloween. 60 years after the original release of Frankenstein, which is crazy. For those who don't remember, this is the Treehouse of Horror that features an adaptation of the short story The Monkey's Paw, the Twilight Zone episode It's a Good Life, which was also remade in Twilight Zone the movie, which we covered in our episode about Twilight Zone the movie, and sort of a loose adaptation of Frankenstein. So Nate, talk us through the reference. Why did they reference this movie?
Yeah, so I mean, this is kind of one of the fun things about Frankenstein, is that it is kind of deeply intertwined with the Treehouse of Horror series, right?
Right.
Because the very first one has this opening warning from Marge, right? Which is taken from this movie and is kind of serving almost the same purpose.
I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
But I feel like it's now one of those Simpsons parodies that's probably, more people probably know it from The Simpsons than from this movie, I think.
Right.
Like, it almost has a life of its own. It's just part of Treehouse of Horror. I'd be curious if, like, younger people know that it's even a parody of Frankenstein or not. But yeah, it started out as this idea of, like, when they were doing Treehouse of Horror, they're like, okay, we're going to do something that we've never done on the show before. People kind of have their expectations about what The Simpsons is. So we need to, like, let them know this is going to be different. And then, of course, they were also worried about, like, parental backlash of, you know, people being like, okay, this is going to be scary and maybe a little violent. Like, you know, are parents going to freak out about this? And even by this second edition of Treehouse of Horror, they're already kind of like, okay, no one seems to actually care. Like, they're going to let their kids watch it anyways.
So please, tuck in your children and... Well, if you didn't listen to me last time, you're not going to now. Enjoy the show.
And I kind of wonder, too, if it was always intended to be that. They're framing it as a warning, but is it actually meant to entice you, right? Kind of like a carnival barker type situation.
Yeah.
I was like reading about the history of this, and Dede, maybe you know more about this, but just that, like, this was kind of coming out of a tradition of this kind of stuff with, like, horror movies and other, you know, horror adjacent stuff. Like, do you have any more background on that?
No, but also, like, I mean, this definitely comes way after Frankenstein 1931, but, like, The Twilight Zone has a host come out. He doesn't warn you, but, like, it's not a totally, like, alien experience from watching genre stuff and having, like, Alfred Hitchcock come out and, like, introduce his thing. So I've always kind of, like, I mean, I knew it was a Frankenstein reference, but I've always kind of thought that there was a little bit more of a tradition in that way. But yeah, it sounds like you've done more research on this than I have. I just love it. And it entirely enticed me as a kid. Like, this wasn't me being like, oh no, time to turn off the TV. It's like, oh, it's going to get good.
Right, totally.
Well, it's funny too, Nate, like, to your point, it kind of feels a bit like the William Castle stuff. The guy who made, like, The Tingler and, like, you know, marketed all these movies where it's like, we're gonna have nurses on standby, it's so scary. Yeah. And, like, is that more just, like, a marketing ploy than this is actually, you know, trying to warn people about the content? But it's that totally works. And, like, how many movies after the fact, you know, were marketed on this, like, oh, it's so scary, people are leaving I mean, The Exorcist. The number one thing everybody told me about The Exorcist as a kid was, like, it was so scary they had to have doctors on hand for people who were fainting in the audience and stuff. And like, so, and it works. Like, that is something that makes you go, okay, like, this is going to be something special, something different. So
yeah, or the whole thing with Psycho about, like, you will not be admitted later, and it's mostly just because they kill off the biggest star in the first 5 minutes.
15 minutes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was doing some half-assed internet research on this, and the best I could find was basically like a Reddit thread in, like, a history Reddit, and someone was like, is this a thing? Like, what was the history with this? And supposedly all of those shenanigans were happening even before Frankenstein. Like, you know, people were fainting, we have to have ambulances on site. Like, that was a thing even before this movie. Yeah. And they were sort of saying that it comes out of a history of carnival stuff, of, you know, Barker's talking about freak shows and sort of like trying to get people in and talking about how scary it is and how it's not for the faint of heart and all of that kind of stuff. So it feels like it's kind of coming out of that, from the best I could tell, at least.
I mean, I feel like I remember hearing even the, like, Lon Chaney Phantom of the Opera, like, that was one of the things, like, once the reveal of his face is so terrifying that, like, women were fainting in the audience, and then that was like, people are like, ooh, now I gotta go see this. Like, so that's like the mid-20s, and it sort of stands to reason that all of that stuff would come out of that sort of theatrical, vaudevillian, carnival sort of era where, like, you have to entice an audience to come because they don't really know what to expect. So, yeah, that's really interesting.
Did anything you read go into, like, the, like, whole Grand Guignol? I don't think I'm pronouncing that correctly at all. Guignol? No. The whole, like, French, like, very dark theatrical history of just, like, doing really spooky things, but there was usually a host kind of, like, guiding the audience through it.
Oh, no, they didn't mention that. That's
like famously, like, when they go to the theater in Interview with the Vampire, the film, like, they'd go to one of those theaters specifically where it's just, like, very macabre, like,
Interesting.
Cool.
They also have an episode in What We Do in the Shadows where they go to the theater and it's that type of theater.
Yeah, so it seems like there's just this long history that, like, Frankenstein is sort of playing off of, and then The Simpsons sort of co-opts. But then, of course, you know, this episode has a whole segment that's also a Frankenstein riff, at least, like, a part of it. It's like, it, like, takes some of the most iconic stuff and then, like, leaves basically the last half of the movie out of the segment.
Also a robot.
Yeah, also a robot. And yeah, I mean, it's funny because I was looking at some of the original drawings of the monster as well for this movie. And there's at least one where it is a robot and kind of looks like the Homer robot in this. That's where the electrodes came from, was like this one drawing where someone went off in a different direction. But you do get, like, the cemetery scene of them digging up the corpse, which is, like, right out of this movie, you know, right down to the crooked gravestones. I think some of them might even be designed right after this movie, the kind of high contrast look of it.
Did you hear that, sir? No, I didn't. Who is it? Frankenstein? The Booger Man?
You get the reanimation scene, of course.
It's moving! It's alive!
You know, I read the book in my early days in university, so I don't remember it super well. But what I remember is that the whole, like, lightning thing in the creation scene, like, that's all invented for the 1931 movie. Yeah. Like, it's sort of implied in the book that there may be some kind of electricity thing because she was obsessed with Luigi Galvani, this, like, scientist who was doing experiments about that stuff. But, like, all that iconography is invented kind of by Whale. And I feel like, you know, watching it, again, I haven't seen the movie since then. I did find the creation scene a little anticlimactic, if I'm honest. I was kind of expecting there to be, like, a big explosive moment in it. But instead, it's just kind of like the electricity runs through him. And then you kind of get the it's alive moment is kind of the climax, I guess. But anyway, that's all recreated here.
I feel like that's going to be a subject that is going to come up a bit this episode, is the anticlimax of everything. But not to tip my hand, but we'll get into it.
Okay. The thing I like about this segment is that I don't think I even clocked the last time we talked about this episode, but is that it's actually a work stress dream that Homer has.
Right.
Where he's like thinking about going to work, and then he has this sort of dream about Mr. Burns firing him, and then like, you know, trying to make this like slave that can just work forever, and Homer's the slave. So I thought that was kind of funny. I hadn't really picked up on that framing before.
And I love when he's dreaming of work, he starts out with taking a nap at work.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very Homer. Very on brand.
Yeah, he's had a couple of those like daydreams within daydreams of like him thinking about being lazy. But yeah, I mean, it's like the why of it is just like it's Frankenstein. It's like,
yeah,
it's one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. So if you're doing a horror anthology parody thing, seems like you have to get to it at some point. But I also think the Universal monster movies are just really influential on the writers, right? They're of the right age for seeing it on endless reruns on TV, I think, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's funny because I feel like in the early 90s, there was this sort of renaissance of the Universal monster movies. Like, I just, for whatever reason, I don't know if they got re-released or what it was, but I just have this like vague recollection of being a kid, and every Halloween there was a big push for this stuff. Again, maybe there was like a re-release or an anniversary or something that I'm not remembering, but I remember at a very young age being aware that there was Frankenstein, Dracula, Invisible Man, The Mummy. You know, again, it's 60 years when this episode airs, so again, around this time when we're kids, Nate, it would have been about 60 to 65 years, you know, anniversary type thing. They were just sort of in the culture. Everybody kind of knew about it. Everybody was kind of talking about, like, kids would dress up as them for Halloween, along with like the superheroes and stuff. But like very specifically, you could buy the licensed Universal Monsters Frankenstein mask or whatever. I want to say there was like even like there was like a special maybe, and then like Halloween Horror Nights, and like, because that's always been a thing. But yeah, I just have this like recollection of knowing about this stuff, which is just kind of a weird. Especially because it is horror, and horror is not something that traditionally is super mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm sure it has a lot to do with the fact that they were parodied on The Simpsons, and like we had Monster Squad growing up, and like all that sort of stuff. It still like amazes me because I love we're gonna get to it. I freaking love this James Whale Frankenstein, easily one of my favorite films of all time. But also like the number of people who know who Frankenstein is but have never seen this film, like don't quite know it, or think that Frankenstein canonically like walks with his hands in front of him. That actually comes later. I want to say it's like in Frankenstein versus The Mummy or something like that. Like it's a later version of a film where they decide that he's blind because his eyes don't work and he has to walk with his hands in front of him. But if you're going to ask someone to do a Frankenstein impression, it's going to be this. And that's not where he does this. And if you're going to ask, you know, any kid who his sidekick is, they're going to say Igor, not Fritz. Like, so there's so much stuff that we kind of chalk up to Frankenstein that is actually more of like Frankenstein in the zeitgeist. And I always find that fascinating because you're like, oh, I love this movie. Do you want to talk about it? And people are like, oh, they actually haven't seen it. Like, yeah. Same with Dracula. Like the number of people who haven't seen the Lugosi Dracula. Of course they know Dracula. You know, Hotel Transylvania has like 3 of them now. Like all of that's, yeah. All that stuff is just so out there, even without regard to, you know, where it started in Hollywood.
Right. Well, and like, blah, I want to suck your blood. Like
blah,
that,
blah.
You know, like, oh, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Like that's just in the culture and like not really a parody of a specific thing, you know? But I think The Simpsons is probably partly one of the reasons that got so popularized, because Bart does it like 3 or 4 times, I think, in those early seasons.
Well, Simpsons and just like cartoons in general. Like
cartoons,
Saturday morning
in general.
Like, you know, because again, I think there was, to your point, Dede, these monsters become iconic, and then all of these elements start to, you know, you just pull the things that you remember regardless of what, you know, sequel it comes from. And then that becomes, because again, for our generation, cartoons and pop culture becomes sort of an entry point, or the thing that introduces us to so much of this stuff. I mean, that's literally the premise of our show. So it stands to reason that whatever the cartoon did is going to be the thing that resonates with us all. And those are the things that we probably saw over and over again in reruns and syndication and all that stuff. So it then starts to solidify and become the thing, even if it's not really the thing. And that's one of the big topics I want to touch on when we start talking about the film. So
yeah, because it causes like what I would describe as like the Mona Lisa effect, where people have an idea of like what the Mona Lisa is, and then they go to the Louvre and they see the Mona Lisa and they're like, oh, it's really small, huh? right?
Yeah.
I think there is sometimes that same effect with the way that pop culture has kind of taken something like Frankenstein's monster and like, you know, made it into this particular thing. And then you go back and watch the original and you're like, oh, that doesn't happen in this. Or, oh, it's not quite what I thought it was going to be. And I feel like that can have different effects, right? You could either be like pleasantly surprised and be like, oh, this is actually like way more interesting and substantial than I thought. Or it could be like, oh, it's like not, it's not really like living up to what I thought it was going to be. So I always find that mismatch moment kind of interesting.
Yeah. There was years ago, there was a Universal week basically at the Brattle Theater in Boston, which is where I used to live. So of course my butt was in the seat every single night. And they one night had both Frankenstein and Dracula together. And this film Bride of Frankenstein makes me cry more, but this makes me feel all the feelings. And during Frankenstein, everyone sat there and they're like, wow, and, you know, kind of took it in. And it was a great experience. And then everyone laughed during Dracula. Oh. Because I was like, visibly enraged. I was like, no, you gotta, this is serious stuff, people. But like, people were just kind of like, oh, this is silly, and it is a little over the top and campy compared to what they might be expecting. But I'm like, this is what started it all. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, gotta watch the Spanish version.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Or go back to Bram Stoker.
Yeah.
Nate, are there other references outside of the sort of like Frankenstein? And I mean, obviously we touched on the Twilight Zone thing in our Twilight Zone episode, but what are some of the other things you clocked in this episode?
Yeah, so we kind of like went through them all in that episode, the ones that were like for sure. So I don't want to like relitigate that. If you want to find out more, you can listen to that episode. But what we didn't do last time is talk about mystery references. Ooh. So these are the ones where we're not really sure, but like either it seems like it might be some kind of reference or we think we know what the reference is, but like it's not confirmed. So why don't we start with segment 3, where we have our Frankenstein parody. I spotted a couple. So the first one is when Mr. Burns says, Smithers to the laboratory. This is like my new theory is because like they do that line a million different times in this. I think it's a Batman 1966 thing. I think it's to the Batcave,
right,
or to the Batmobile, right?
Yeah.
And I think they just took that and they use it like so many different ways in The Simpsons, but I think that's kind of the origin of it. So, you know, we get that here. I was curious, and again, Dede, you're more fluent, I think, in the Universal monster movies, but like there's some stuff that happens, especially in the reanimation sequence in this episode, that isn't from this movie, isn't from Frankenstein. And so I'm curious if they're drawing on other Universal monster movie stuff. Like particularly there's the shot where Burns and Smithers are like walking into the lab and they get all distorted by the different lab equipment in front of them. And I think on the commentary, they sort of say like, yeah, it's riffing on Universal monster movies. I don't know if it's like necessarily a parody of something specific or just kind of like, this is the vibe of like what these movies are like.
Oh, I think maybe vibe. If it is a specific reference, I don't know it, but that doesn't mean it's not. Yeah.
I feel like it's probably just like a riff on all the accoutrement in the lab scenes and stuff like that. Like I think the distortion thing is probably the animators being like, we can do something fun and clever with this.
Yeah.
But the amount of stuff, like stuff that probably doesn't actually need to be there, that feels like it's coming out of those monster movies for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the other interesting thing about this segment is that it has a score. And of course, this movie does not have a score.
Definitely does not.
It sure doesn't.
So I'm like, you know, and again, it sort of feels like a mashup score of like, this is what we think of when we think of horror movies. But I'm also kind of like, is there a specific thing that it's drawing on? Like, admission time, I haven't seen Dracula 1931. But so like, maybe it's that, right? Or maybe it's some other Universal monster movie that they're drawing on, but it's definitely not Frankenstein. So I'm also kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, over-the-top scores certainly are like a horror thing in general. One thing we really haven't mentioned too is that there's Universal horror, but then there's also the Hammer horror that would have been
going to say,
steeped.
Yeah, I would think it's maybe more pulling from like the Hammer vibe, which is a little more, in my opinion, a little more campy and cartoonish in not necessarily in a bad way. But yeah, that feels more like it might be coming from, like all the sort of those tropes that we think of are probably more likely coming from Hammer movies than at least the 30s Universal movies. Because again, the Universal, they then did remakes in the like 50s, 60s, 70s. So it could also be that they're pulling from that sort of stuff too. But I agree, Dede. Like, that was my sort of first thought, is like, oh, that's probably more Hammer than Universal. But like, again, for these animators and these Simpsons guys, it probably all just blends together. Because you watch it as a kid on TV, you don't remember if it was produced by Hammer or produced by Universal. You just know it's a monster movie. So
yeah,
right,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like famously, the end credits for the first Treehouse of Horror is like they're bringing together the Addams family, but also like I think it's maybe the Munsters or something else like that. And then they also have a theremin, which is really more like 50s monster movies, like giant monster movies, sci-fi stuff. It's kind of just like blending all of this stuff together, which is part of what makes it so fun. Okay, let's talk about segment 1. So the monkey paw. The thing I was mostly thinking about here is like on the commentary, they're basically like it's based on the short story, right? So which was like a 1902 Harper's Monthly short story. But there have been like a dozen different adaptations of this as well. So I was also curious if this is a reference to any of the movies or the TV adaptations even like that they're drawing from, because it's not exactly the story. Like it takes place in a different country, but I've never seen any of these, so I have no idea whether there's something they're drawing on specifically here.
I just always assumed it was like the kind of classic, I don't want to say Disney thing, but like in a way the Disney thing of like, let's take this fable or this thing and just do our spin on it. It's not necessarily a direct reference to any one particular retelling of it. It's just like, this is a story that's been done a bunch. Let's do our version of it. And I kind of like that. I kind of like that when they do things like that. Even like it's another Treehouse of Horror thing, but the Nightmare Krusty doll, which ultimately kind of like becomes Child's Play, or like, that's been riffed on a bunch, but like they're not really doing one specific riff on that, because I know the Twilight Zone did it, and there was another movie, I think it's Trilogy of Terror, that's done that and stuff. But like, it's just, let's take the idea of a possessed doll, and what would that be like in the Simpsons universe? Like, so I think this is one of those cases where it's like, let's just take the monkey's paw concept that everybody is sort of familiar with, and how would we sort of do that story? Yeah, and I love this segment. It's so like, I mean, it has one of my all-time favorite Bart Simpson lines, which is, I can do that, but I don't want to.
Still funny.
And the fake out joke of like, the store is over there. Oh wait, no, it's over there. And like, there's so many great moments in this. So, and I like that it's just sort of like, this is just a Simpsons version of this tale, as opposed to a sort of, how can we make direct reference to like the Bram Stoker's Dracula version thing that we talked about last year.
Yeah. You guys can see me making a face when faces are not good for podcasts. But when you were like, oh, they said they fashioned this after the 1902 story. I'm like, really? No, they probably were aware of this and all the other iterations, and we're just like, oh, we're going to do our own take. Like what Adam was just saying, like the idea that they're standing by the fact that they're just like, no, we found the story and we adapted it. It's like, no, it's just a thing that people know about, like a cautionary tale.
Right. It's like, once all you need to know is there's a claw of some kind that grants wishes, and you get a certain number of them, and it, just like every genie story ever, they have unforeseen consequences. Yeah, that's it's the premise. It's like, that's enough. You don't really need to know any details about the story. So,
well, what's cool about it too is that it also feels like, and in some ways, I think is what they were trying to go for with these Treehouse of Horrors. It really feels like a Twilight Zone premise. Like, same idea. Twilight Zone would sometimes take like this fable or this thing that's in the zeitgeist and do their twist on it.
Yeah, I did catch one more in this segment, I think, which is The Day the Earth Stood Still, which makes sense with Kang and Kodos.
Yep.
But they say,
"People of Earth, we come to you in the spirit of hostility and menace."
And I'm pretty sure that's a riff on Klaatu saying, "We have come to visit you in peace and with goodwill." Okay, the only other one that I spotted, which they actually call it on the commentary, but I don't think I logged it before because it's not technically a movie reference, but is Jim Reardon's creepy name is Jim Rondo Reardon. And I was always like, what is that? What is Rondo? I like looked it up. Is it a movie? No. It is a reference to the actor Rondo Hatton. who is best known for his recurring role as the Creeper, starting with the Sherlock Holmes movie, The Pearl of Death in 1944.
Okay, interesting.
But he had like a disability, I think, that sort of made him look, unusual and in the context of the movie world. And so that was sort of his claim to fame, was that he played these roles.
Oh, you guys don't know the Rondo Haddon Awards?
No.
Oh, it's an annual award, like in the world of horror. It's a fairly big deal if you win a Rondo. Basically, like people who write about horror, people who make horror related art, horror novels, horror, films. Rondo, it's like the Edgar Awards or something for horror specifically.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, it's the Rondos. Yeah, so I was just like, oh, you don't have Rondo? Yeah. Oh, wait, you're not. You were literally just like, I'm not a big horror person. Like, yeah.
Well, that's really cool, though.
Yeah, for me, it was a deep cut.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how long the awards have been going on, so perhaps it was then as well.
Yeah.
But it also, it stands to reason, too, because I'm assuming that, like, he would have picked his own spooky name, and it seems like it makes sense that the director would, like, again, going back further and further into, like, cinema history, it makes sense that it's one of the directors that has that reference. I mean, obviously, there's the alliteration of Rondo and Reardon, but still. That's an interesting deep cut, Nate. Or maybe not so deep, depending on your knowledge of horror, but I think for most fans, that would be a deep cut, yeah.
Agreed.
Well, is there anything else from the episode we want to touch on before we get into the film?
I just want to say that I don't think Smithers gets enough blame because if he were less afraid of Mr. Burns turning him into the body when he hears it that Homer's a bad choice, this would have been a very different segment.
That's true. That's very true.
Totally.
Smithers, that toady, I tell you.
If you were going to reverse engineer the perfect, like, mad scientist and lackey, Smithers and
yes,
Burns
absolutely.
are such a good match. Yeah.
Yeah, Smithers is a perfect Fritz / Igor. Igor. So one thing I didn't catch the last time from the first segment is, like, they have that whole sequence where they kind of make fun of how popular The Simpsons has become, right? Which is great. There's a scene where they're in, like, a t-shirt shop and there's, like, all these stupid Bart Simpson t-shirts that say things like, don't have a cow, man, good grief, man, etc., etc. And the guy who complains about the shirts and says $18 for this, what a ripoff, is a caricature of Rich Moore, director of The Simpsons.
Yes.
So I never caught that that's who it was that says that line, but I thought that was funny. Also in that sequence, again, something I didn't pick up on before, is when they cut to the UN and it's world peacetime, and they have, like, the English ambassador and the Argentinian ambassador. And the English ambassador's like, oh, sorry about the Falklands, good sir. And Argentina says, forget it. We kind of knew they were yours.
That's nice. And that's one of those things where as a kid, you're like, what? But now,
exactly.
As sophisticated adults, you appreciate the humor.
Right. Semi-sophisticated, at least.
Well, yeah.
With the third segment, the thing that I was thinking about this time is, like, this segment barely has a story, but it is one of the greatest joke machines that they've, like, ever made, where they just kind of, like, let Mr. Burns loose for that whole segment. And he has so many funny lines, like when he calls the workers
Gold brickers, layabouts, slugabeds. Little do they realize their days of suckling at my teat are numbered.
so many classic Mr. Burns lines in this. So I love that.
I also love his line reading of
Look at me, I'm Davy Crockett.
Yes, classic.
so good.
Damn it, Smithers, this isn't rocket science, it's brain surgery.
So I used to work at a tech university, and we had to say, like, this isn't rocket surgery, because it was very likely we were either working with a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon at any given time. So it just became this thing. We're like, this isn't rocket surgery. We had to come up with a new thing for that.
I was going to say one of the details I loved was the sound design on when they buzz open Homer's head, and then when the lid, for lack of a better term, falls on the ground. It's just, I keep shouting it out. The sound design on The Simpsons is, like, so underrated, doesn't get enough credit, and I think this is an episode, like a peak episode from the early days that just emphasizes how detailed and thought out that stuff is, and how they use it for dramatic effect, but also for, in this case, like, really solid comedic effect. And I just love that so much.
Yeah. And the animation, too, in that sequence is great. Okay, I have one more funny thing. So I was listening to the commentary this morning in prep for the episode, and on the commentary, they said that the original ending for this was supposed to be a parody of broadcast news, but no one got it. including Jim Brooks, who directed the film. And so they got rid of it and redid the ending. So what the hell was this ending that was a parody of broadcast news with Homer and Burns on the same body? Because
I don't know.
The ending of broadcast news is like a flash forward with the love triangle characters all meeting up later. Mm-hmm. So like, was it like a love triangle with Marge and Burns and Homer, or like what was it?
I don't know. I wonder if it's on the DVD.
Maybe,
because they sometimes put like deleted scenes. So I wonder if that's something that got cut during the scripts stage, or if it got cut during the animation stage. But yeah, that's weird to think, because it doesn't seem like something that
is possible.
But yeah, exactly. That's so
I love that they're like, you know what, this Frankenstein segment needs more of broadcast news.
Broadcast news, yeah. Yeah,
and especially because they don't really parody Jim Brooks movies that much. That's like, and probably with good reason. They like do little like nods to the titles of his movies, but that's kind of about it.
Hey everybody, it's Adam from the future. After we recorded, Nate actually did manage to find the table read script for this segment on the Internet Archive of all places, which included the broadcast news parody. In it, Mr. Burns' experiment leads to two Homers, one with Homer's brain and the other a brainless Homer body that can only like do the Frankenstein noises. The climax is a big fight between them at Moe's, where Marge can't decide which one of them is her husband, but then ends with a flash forward 7 years later where they all reunite and Marge reveals that she's with someone else, but sometimes she thinks she should have picked one of them. That's the broadcast news bit. Anyway, I think we can all agree the thing with two heads ending was definitely the right choice. Anyway, back to the episode. All right, well, let's use this as an opportunity to segue into the film itself. And as I said, Dede, I'm so glad that you're here. I think this is going to be an interesting discussion because I think there's going to be some differing opinions. But before we get into all of that, Dede, how would you sum this film up in a sentence?
Oh. Can I give you like my favorite quip about Frankenstein?
Sure, yeah.
Knowledge is knowing that Frankenstein isn't the monster. Wisdom is knowing he is.
Ooh. Okay, interesting. That actually kind of works nicely.
Thank you.
Well, we grabbed our plot synopsis from the original press, and I'm doing air quotes, tear sheet, a term that I have never really heard before, but it's not quite a poster. It's
not quite a mop. And it's not quite a puppet, but man.
But it's something that was used in the 30s to promote these movies amongst, I guess, the theatrical distributors and stuff. But here's how they describe the film, and I'm gonna do my best like 1930s Barker voice. The monster Frankenstein made will chill you, thrill you, fascinate you, make you hate him, fear him, pity him. Wildest imagination made startlingly real. Unbelievably creepy conceptions brought to the screen in a manner that will make your hair stand on end. See this story of the man-made monster doomed to a career of aimless havoc, the story of the creature's maker and of the latter's bride-to-be. Its thrills have lasted for 100 years, and today it's bigger than ever on the screen! Which is like, holy crap, they were really...
They're selling it.
They're selling it. And I found, there was another press flyer that I found, and this was the tagline they used for the movie, which I think is hilarious. Pounds with drama, exclamation mark. Burns with passion, exclamation mark. Startles with thrills, exclamation mark. Shocks with surprise, exclamation mark.
They couldn't possibly say less about what this movie is.
I know, right?
Yeah, no kidding, right? Like, it's just, it's gonna be scary. Which again, it like when you think about the prologue, like it seems like that was something that all of the press was really leaning into for this.
It's terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, you got to imagine though that people probably know the book, right? So like that's probably what they're leaning on, I would guess.
They know the book, and also this is not even the first film adaptation of this. Like,
no,
Frankenstein was very present in the cultural zeitgeist. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to that point, Dede, what is your relationship with this film? I mean, you already alluded to the fact that it's one of your favorites, but like, how and when did you first see this? How did it become your favorite film? I'd just love to hear more about that.
Sure, it's not my number one favorite because I refuse to figure out which one that is because I would
Absolutely. That's
change
very
10,
valid.
20 minutes later. It is definitely one of my favorites. I have a giant Frankenstein tattoo on one of my calves next to Lugosi Dracula on the other one. I don't remember ever seeing this for the first time. I was very much so raised in like a monster-friendly household, so I'm sure at some point it was on. My parents sat us down to watch it, probably like 3 or 4 or something, so I didn't necessarily form that memory, but it was just something like, again, like where I'm like, oh, people have seen this, forgetting kind of that not everyone starts here with Frankenstein.
Right.
I love this film so much. I think it is really, really interesting. Like, of course, as a kid, I'm like, yay, monsters. Oh, they killed that kid. That's bad. But
That's bad. That's good.
Can I go now? No. So, but, yeah, I don't know. I think the Frankenstein as a monster is arguably my favorite type of monster because he's just so unwilling. Like, he's thrust into this. He's like a child. Like, I kind of want to, I can fix him, guys. No, I want to protect him to a certain extent, but I feel for him so much as a monster, and Dr. Frankenstein himself is so much not an outlier in terms of how certain people think of themselves and their own power. And so I appreciate that so much. Yeah. Also the fact that it's like the first science fiction, like ever, the book itself. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it had to start somewhere, but guys, that's wild. And it was written by like a pregnant teenager. Let's give them some credit. But yeah, so I don't know. There's nothing I don't love about this. I acknowledge it's not a perfect film. You know, hello, scores are nice. And there are certain things that don't quite make sense. And also the incredibly abrupt ending. The fact that it was 70 minutes long. Like, they could have tacked on an ending. James Whale knew what he was doing at that point. I find it just really tickles. Like, if I want to watch something fun, I can watch this. If I want to really think about something, I can watch this. Like, it's hard for me to casually watch it, but I can throw it on. I can't wait to hear which one of you I'm going to have to duke it out with about this.
Well, Nate, what about you? What was no? That's I'm this is not a means of me trying to spoil anything. But
I'll spoil. It's not me.
Yeah, there you go. Nate, what's your relationship with this film?
Yeah, so I think I first saw this. I usually have a way worse memory for this than Adam. Adam, like, remembers the first time he saw, like, every movie, and I'm always like, I don't know, probably got it on DVD. But no, this one I actually do remember very distinctly because in my first year of university, I was in, like, a liberal studies class at an art school, and we were talking a lot about the history of technology and design. And one of the things we read was the book Frankenstein. And then I believe we watched the movie after reading the book. And so I remember that very distinctly. And so for me, it's very wrapped up in this broader history of science fiction, and like our relationship between real technology and our understanding of nature and all of those sorts of things. And then this feeling of horror or our reach exceeding our grasp and all of those sorts of things, right?
Right.
And so I think because of that, though, because it was always in direct comparison with the book, I think the first time I saw it, I didn't totally appreciate the movie. And like the movie felt very abridged and kind of almost incomplete, right? And
That's
but then
generous, I would say, but we'll get into it.
and the thing, so now I've rewatched it and I have a very different take on it. And I also watched Bride of Frankenstein for the first time, which is really interesting. And I think, you know, coming back to the Del Toro of it all, I didn't really realize that the two 1930s movies are actually like both adaptations of different chunks of the book.
Right.
And like the first one cuts a bunch of stuff out, and then Bride of Frankenstein kind of takes the rest of it and turns it into a movie. His desire to have a mate is in the book. The blind man is in the book, and the family that he's sort of like stalking, more or less, that's all from the book. So I you know, that was like a real realization kind of coming back to this years and years later. And honestly, I think watching the Del Toro version, as much as I did enjoy it, it made me appreciate how much this 1931 movie is its own thing. As much as it's taking the DNA of the story, it adds so much to it. And the stuff I love most about this movie is the stuff that's added by Whale and the team and the cast and all of that. So we'll get into it more, but that's my initial take. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, it's funny. I do have a distinct memory of watching this as a youngster. I don't really remember what age, but it was when, and Dede, you probably aren't familiar with this, but Saturday Night at the Movies was a thing on TVO, the like local. How would you describe TVO, Nate? Like, it's not a cable channel, it's not public access, but it's like, I guess it's the equivalent of like Ontario's version of PBS. So they had this show called Saturday Night at the Movies, which was hosted by this guy, film critic Elwie Ost. And they ran a lot of old movies, but it would give you sort of like a little preamble to sort of set the movie up. And then after the movie, he might interview a filmmaker or interview someone to, again, provide a little additional context. So I watched this a lot as a kid just because it was an easy way. You know, again, this is pre-streaming, so you got movies however you could. And so I remember this was on one, it was probably around Halloween, and I watched it. And the thing that I have this distinct memory of was the crediting of the monster being question mark. Yeah. And I was like, as a kid, I was kind of like, well, that's weird. Like, why are they not giving the guy credit? And we all know it's like Boris Karloff. So like, why are they not, and just like not understanding that. And like, that was kind of confusing to me. And then I feel like we watched it again in high school. I want to say in like one of our, like, I think like sociology or anthropology class. And the reason I have a memory of that was people in the class were kind of like making fun of the prologue where the guy came out and was like, we're going to scare the living daylights out of you. And everyone's like, no, you're not. You're an old black and white movie from the 30s. Like, what are you talking about? So I think I watched it again in high school, and then I went back into my Letterboxd. And the only other time I have this logged is from 2010. So I think, and it's funny, Nate, I was under the impression that I read and watched this in university, but now I'm starting to think that you did, and I'm just sort of conflating the two. And I didn't actually, because I also took like pop literature courses, but like, I don't have a copy of the book, so I'm like, maybe I didn't read this. But anyway, we certainly would have discussed it. I then ended up watching it with my old roommate, Brad, who was a big Universal Monsters fan. He also introduced me to Twin Peaks. He, like, weirdly in university introduced me to a lot of these things that became important, but it was like one of these things of like, my relationship with all of these things were strictly through The Simpsons. So like Brad was like, okay, well, if you like this, you got to like actually appreciate the real things. So, but the thing for me is that my biggest relationship with Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster, all that stuff is through parody. And what this really unlocked for me was that fact, and that like so much of my knowledge of all of this stuff comes from things like Young Frankenstein, a movie I loved as a kid.
It's pronounced Frankenstein.
The Abbott and Costello movies. Like, I realized I don't really have much of a relationship with the original source material of all of these monster movies. It all comes out of the comedy adjacent versions of the monster movies, because that's more my thing. So, yeah, it's interesting that, like, I know I've seen this movie before, but it has no lasting impact on me and no real lasting memory. And the thing that I did was, as I was watching it, being like, oh, that's that bit from Young Frankenstein, or, oh, that's that bit from this cartoon, or, oh, it's that, like, it's again, it's the premise of our show. But I've seen the movie before, like, and I've probably seen the movie multiple times, and yet for whatever reason, that hasn't imprinted on me. The parody stuff has. Which is something that I want to unpack later, obviously. But have either of you seen the Kenneth Branagh's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein? The sort of like, again, I haven't. We really have to retire this. But the sort of like in the wake of Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, they did it again, being like, why don't we make an R-rated, sexy version of this?
With De Niro as the monster?
With De Niro as the monster, yeah. But have either of you... I mean, Dede, I'm assuming you have, but...
No, somehow I haven't. It hasn't been, like... I haven't actively avoided it. It's just one of those, like, I have other stuff to watch.
Yeah.
I love Branagh, and I remember really being impressed by how text... dedicated his Hamlet was. Like, you can open a copy of Hamlet and just follow the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so that time I was really intrigued, but no, never seen it.
He's such a fascinating filmmaker to me, because he is, to me, the definition of hit or miss. Because, like, when he hits so hard, And like when he misses, he makes Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or like Death on the Nile. Like the Poirot movies for me is like the weirdest thing because it's like the first one is like really fun and like just like a classic murder mystery. The second one is borderline one of the worst movies I've ever seen, and then the third one is this like gothic horror that just like. It's incredible. Like Nate and I love that movie so much. But you're like, the same filmmaker and filmmaking team made all three of these. How is that possible? Like they're so completely different. Anyway, all that's to say, I have seen Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's not worth seeing. I like it's not good. But because of the Bram Stoker's Dracula thing, Dede, I thought it was worth bringing up because of you returning for that. But if you haven't seen it, then there's no sense in discussing it. So in that sense, let's discuss this one. Nate, how did this movie get made?
Okay, I'll do my best here, but Dede, please jump in if I'm like saying something wrong. You probably, again, have more context than I do, but this is from what I was able to research. So we got to start with the book. And as Dede was saying, so Frankenstein was written in June of 1816, which is known as the year without a summer because of the eruption of Mount Tambora. 18-year-old Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin spent the unusually cold, dark summer in Switzerland with her stepsister Claire Claremont, her soon-to-be husband Percy Bysshe Shelley, Lord Byron, and Byron's doctor, John William Polidori, intellectualizing and smoking opium.
As one does.
As one does. So inspired by reading the Phantasmagoriana, a French collection of German ghost stories, they decided to have a contest to see who could write the scariest story. So Lord Byron ends up writing a fragment that later inspired Polidori to write The Vampire, or The Vampire, which is a precursor to Dracula. Percy Shelley was declared the winner of the contest, but Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, soon to be Mary Shelley, wrote the most enduring story of the bunch, Frankenstein. So she basically wrote the outline of this just as part of this contest, and she didn't win, which is kind of astonishing. As Dede was saying, like this had already been adapted multiple times by the time this film comes out as plays. There were 3 films already. And interestingly, this movie was an adaptation of a specific play adaptation of the book. And I think probably the most important reason to know that is that the play made the decision to make the monster a pantomime role. So the fact that the monster does not speak in the movie comes from this play. And that's a big departure from the book where the monster can speak and actually speaks at length. So the story of the movie itself. The owner of Universal Pictures, Carl Laemmle, had a nephew, Carl Jr., who was the one who convinced him to actually get onto the Gothic horror train. So he was the one who said, you should really do Dracula. And then soon after was like, you should also do Frankenstein. At this point, James Whale was, well known in England as a theater director, but still not a huge personality in Hollywood. And as a result, I think probably most of his cast ends up being British for this movie. Of course, it's worth noting that this is a pre-code production, and you can definitely tell. And I think Whale really thrived in this era. He was openly gay. He was attracted to the dark side of human nature, had a kind of wicked sense of humor. But then in 1934, they adopt the code. And I don't think that that's the reason why his career kind of takes a nosedive, but you can see how this environment was perfect for Whale, and maybe after that was maybe less so. So not long after this, his career kind of is a problem, mostly because of his 1936 version of Showboat, which was so expensive that it caused the management of Universal Pictures to change hands. Wow. Yeah, and some speculate that, of course, it may also have been because he was out of the closet and there was some discrimination going on as well. But there are lots of different stories about sort of what happened to James Whale, but kind of a tragic figure in certain ways. And there's a whole movie about that, too. Was it Gods and Monsters? Is that what it's called? Yeah, I just watched that.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's
really
interesting. Yeah, I think it's they take some liberties, but it's a pretty interesting movie.
Oh, for sure.
And at the end, you have Brendan Fraser doing the walk with the arms out and everything, which, as we've established, not from this movie. Okay, so the production. I think the biggest production note on this, which is fascinating to think about, is that this was originally set to be directed by a guy named Robert Florey, who I'm not super familiar with, and to star Bela Lugosi. as the monster. And the result of this is actually one of the deepest cut movie references on The Simpsons I think I've ever found. It sort of relates to this alternate history of Bela Lugosi as the monster. So in the episode Worst Episode Ever, which is from season 12, we get this whole plot where comic book guy has like a hidden area in the comic book shop where he has all of this sort of like dead media, right? Like stuff that, you know, is out of circulation or is kind of underground and all this sort of stuff. And one of the posters he has in this room is a poster, a real poster of Bela Lugosi as Frankenstein's monster, which was created in the very short window where they thought Bela Lugosi was going to be the monster. And this poster is fascinating because it depicts the monster towering over a city with laser eyes, shooting into the foreground and people running away. Now, keep in mind, this is before King Kong.
Right.
So obviously, like, the Simpsons folks, like, saw this thing and were like, this is so fascinating. What the hell is this? They put it in this episode and they changed the title from Frankenstein to Attack of the 50-Foot Frankenstein, which I think is pretty funny. But I was also like, why would they have depicted Frankenstein this way at this time, knowing that, like, giant monster movies are not quite the thing they're going to become yet? I think it's because of The Lost World, the 1925 movie. Because if you look at the poster for that, they're almost identical. It's just that instead of a T-Rex, you have Frankenstein's monster.
Right.
So anyways, I thought that was like fascinating. And I had no idea about the sort of Lugosi of it all, that he was supposed to be in this role. Apparently, he just didn't like the makeup part and didn't kind of screen test very well. And Boris Karloff was very eager, and he basically like teamed up with Jack Pierce, who was the Universal Pictures makeup guy, to do a great screen test in the full makeup for this role.
Oh, cool. That's super cool.
So in terms of the performance of this movie, again, this is like super early days of film in terms of, you know, box office numbers and stuff. So it's like, take all of this with a grain of salt. But supposedly the budget was about $290,000 and the box office was $1.4 million. So big hit. No Academy Awards. Shocking. This was not really the era where something like this would be, you know, recognized. This is kind of interesting. This was 87th on AFI's original 100 Years, 100 Movies list.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which we just covered on the show. We talked about its relationship to The Simpsons. It was actually removed for the 2007 10-year anniversary list. It makes me wonder, like, is this movie's sort of reputation, maybe to your point, Adam, like when we were kids, this movie was, or sort of Frankenstein more broadly, was like everywhere. Has that changed? I mean, again, this is now 20 years old, the second list. So who knows where we're at now if we did that whole exercise again. But do you feel like maybe the prestige of this movie has tapered off a little bit?
Well, you know what? Let's put a pin in that, Nate. Let's save it. Let's save it so that Dede and I can fight.
We're gonna fight, but I mean,
get on the boxing gloves. Yeah.
I guess there are probably in the past, 20 years, there are 13 films maybe that have come out that are better than it and it bumped it. I hope there are 13 films that are worthy in the past 20 years. Shuffle the list around a little bit.
To be fair, like, horror and sci-fi don't have great representation in the AFI lists, any of them, outside of the ones specific to the genre. It is interesting that it makes the cut the first time around, but then it's like, what supplants it the second time around that they felt maybe does a better job or is more worthy that it doesn't make that list? That is the sort of interesting question.
Yeah, and also, like, with the Del Toro coming out, will that renew interest in this? Like, who knows?
Yeah, and The Bride, of course, or that's coming out.
Oh
next
yeah, The
year.
Bride. Yep.
Yeah. So one more quick thing on this that I think is interesting in terms of the Simpsons parody, honestly, too. This film was made, as I said, 3 years before the Hays Code when it came in 1934. But then it was re-released in 1937 and, like, has this long history of re-releases and TV and all that sort of stuff. But the interesting thing is, with this very first re-release, they actually cut it down to make it compliant with the code. Right. And so they removed all the dialogue that mentioned God, which, as you might imagine, is removing some pretty important lines.
Yeah.
They shortened the part where Fritz tortures the monster with a torch, and they removed the scene where the monster accidentally drowns Maria.
Yeah.
Which is
So
like
it's
the
like-
entire catalyst for the ending.
Right. It's like it's such a lesser movie. And the crazy thing is, this version was the only version that was available till 1986.
Yeah. Well, this is the funny thing is that, again, I remember my grandfather, who was, again, I wouldn't call him a cinephile, but like he liked movie history and all this stuff. I remember distinctly him telling me the story about the scene with the little girl and how it was cut. And and then to be honest, he may not even have ever seen the restored version with the scene intact. Like, I think he just sort of knew it as this, like, oh, originally there was this sequence that they had to cut out. And so I don't know that he ever ended up actually seeing the movie with it in. I don't know. But I do also wonder, and I'm sure I probably could have figured this out, but we mentioned the fact that the movie is a brisk 70 minutes and feels like it's lacking some elements. And I do wonder, like, is that a result of those cuts? Like, were all of those cuts restored? I know that, again,
they were basically all restored to my knowledge.
Oh, okay, because I thought I read something saying that, like, it was just the sort of the little girl scene was found, but other stuff was left sort of lost forever. But okay, so the version we see is the complete intended film. Which, okay, well, that's interesting, because then that will further some of my arguments, maybe. But it is interesting, though, that like those were taken out and ultimately saved, thankfully, because I can't imagine watching the movie without that stuff. Like it would feel like it's even more lacking in plot elements. And as you say, Nate, like any mention of the word God, like the original title of the novel is Frankenstein or a Modern Day Prometheus. Like, I think that's kind of key to the text.
Yeah. Well, and the whole idea of playing God is like, that's the whole thing.
You know?
That's the whole point of this. That's the entire point of it. Yeah, I was watching this last night again, happily so. And I was watching it specifically for the line of like, now I know what it feels like to be God, because I was like, oh, I wonder which cut I'm watching, because it was just some free random streaming thing that I happened to pull up. And I saw the line and I was like, oh, okay, it's a good one. Like, yeah. But no, I do remember when I was a kid watching the version with the little girl. It was just like, I might not be remembering it correctly, but I remember it was like hinted at, but you wasn't shown. But as a child, that was very confusing, because I'm like, there's no nuance in my head at that age. Like, I just didn't know what happened in the plot.
I mean, it's interesting. I watched the 4K version of the film, and the reason why I say it's interesting is because that shot of him tossing her in, like, is clearly degraded because it's not coming from the negative. Like, they cut this stuff from the negative. And again, what I read was that the scene was found in a print in Berlin or something in the 80s or whatever. It's not coming from the direct negative. It's coming from, several generations later. There's definitely versions of this movie that are out there that is without that scene. And as you say, Dede, with all of these old classic movies that copyright is kind of sketchy about, you can find older versions that may not be the most intact versions. So I agree. I feel like the version I originally saw of this didn't have that scene. And it wasn't until maybe when I watched it with my roommate Brad, who had that classic DVD box set of the Universal Monsters. And it was like, fully restored, and like you get the full uncut version. And that I finally did see this scene that I remember my grandfather telling me about. So
it's like when we were watching Metropolis, and depending on what you see, it's which version it is. Yeah.
Nate, totally. This movie is also kind of famous for having like a myriad of sequels of, varying qualities. Did you do any research into like all of those?
I mean, I haven't seen any of them except for Bride of Frankenstein. So, I mean, Dede, how many of them have you seen, and are there any that you would actually like recommend seeing? Because I know like they were pumping out a lot of these, Son of Frankenstein, The Ghost of Frankenstein, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, and then of course Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein. Do any of those like have a place in your heart, or are they just kind of other movies that exist?
I mean, they have a place in my heart as other movies that exist,
right.
But Yeah, I don't know. I like when the different monsters cross over because it makes less and less sense, because one of the things about, like, if you have a single monster, it's like this is a single mythology that they adhere to. Like Frankenstein, very much being a science fiction film, it's in our world, but just science functions a little bit differently, or maybe technology is a little bit more advanced. But then you get to Dracula and it's like, what? Like this is where, like,
Right.
immortality exists, and then you get to, like, the Mummy, and it's just like you have to fold in all of these other realities, which can go either way. But no, I don't think necessarily any of the rest of those are a specific canon that, like, oh my god, you haven't seen Son of Frankenstein. But if you enjoy that sort of thing and you're happy with it being a little campier, I would highly recommend checking them out.
Yeah. Adam, you said you'd seen Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein?
I think so. Again, there's so many of those Abbott and Costello Meets movies.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly which one I've seen. I think it's Frankenstein because I think that's the, like, iconic one, but I could be mistaken. So going back to the universal monsters of it all, like, as a kid, as I wear my Phantom of the Opera sweater, I was big into the Phantom of the Opera, so I watched all of those adaptations. So I was, again, familiar with these monsters. And I even just, like, skimming through the posters for all of these sequels, like, there is this sort of cozy charm to all of this stuff that, even if I don't love these movies, like, I love the iconography. And what makes those sequels so interesting is that not necessarily that they're key texts, but that they contain elements that become the thing that everybody associates with Frankenstein, even though it's not in the first film. So things like Igor, things like the lumbering hands, the grunt, like, all of those things don't come from this movie. They come from the sequels, which probably nobody has seen, or most people haven't seen, but for whatever reason become iconic through the parodies, and therefore has solidified our ideas of what these things are, even though they're from the things that most people don't know, which I think is fascinating. And maybe that's sort of like our entry point into let's discuss the film, because that, to me, I think was what I really was struggling with when watching this, is that I think Young Frankenstein kind of has ruined this movie for me, because all the beats that I recognize, I'm just sort of like, I chuckle at, because I'm like, oh, that's that moment from Young Frankenstein. Like, you know, the abnormal criminal brain thing. And I just think of Marty Feldman dropping the brain and being like, and his big eyes bulging. And he's like, and when he said he got the brain and it was Abby Normal, which he thought was a name, and then Gene Wilder screaming at him, "You got me an abnormal brain!" Like, it's just, that movie's so over the top and silly, but it's still actually, like, it's a half decent adaptation of the original text.
Well, of the film.
And of the film, that when you go back and watch the original film, you're sort of like, I don't know, I just can't get past that. I would be like watching Airport 77 after watching Airplane. You'd just be like, well, this is, what do you mean? Like, this is so silly. I can't get past it because I'm just thinking about Leslie Nielsen saying, "Stop calling me Shirley." So it's what I do think is interesting, though, or so fascinating, is this idea of, like, Fritz being the name of the assistant. And I'm like, isn't it Igor or isn't it Igor? Like, that's always, like, that's my associate. Well, no, that doesn't come up until Son of Frankenstein. And, it's
a different character played by
a different actor.
By Bela Lugosi, right?
And not only that, like, the fact that in my head, the assistant has a Peter Lorre voice. Peter Lorre never played the assistant, but that's how, you know, Hollywood and parody has always done the assistant, with that sort of, like, that Peter Lorre voice. And I was trying to think of, like, other movies that are like this, where it's like the sequels have iconography that becomes associated with the original thing. And I was trying to think of something, and I called out to Nate, and I was like, what am I missing? What am I forgetting? He's like, Friday the 13th. I was like, yes, that is a perfect example of, like, all of the things that we associate with that series don't necessarily come from the first movie. Yeah, they come from the second or the third, or, like, the subsequent
hockey
sequels.
Masks?
Yep.
Yes, exactly. Like, the hockey mask doesn't show up until the third movie, I think. Jason doesn't show up till the second movie. Like, his mother is the murderer in the first movie. So it's like, I think that's so fascinating, this idea of how the also-rans still can create iconography that is so lasting and so powerful that people associate the IP with it, even though it's not from the first film. And when you go back and revisit the first film, you're like, where is that beat? Where is that thing? Where is that the blind man thing? Like that's such a great scene in Young Frankenstein with Gene Hackman of all people. That's not in the first movie. That's in the sequel. Like, so that was what I was really struggling with within this film, is that the parodies had kind of ruined it for me. I wasn't able to take it seriously, but also I was missing beats, but also I was like, this is different. That's surprising to me. And like, I just was sort of bumping up against that, along with the plotting of this movie is really interesting to me in that there's really not very much of it. And that ending is so abrupt and like, out of like, it's so, to your point, Dede, like it's 70 minutes. You could have tacked on like a real ending. It kind of just fizzles out. And like, don't get me wrong, there are parts of this movie that I think, like the visual language and all that stuff, and we can unpack all of that. That's all great. But yeah, I really struggled with this. And when it was over, I was kind of like, that really left no imprint on me. Like it kind of left me emotionally cold, which I was surprised by, because I thought I was going to like this more than I did.
Okay. Well, I had a completely different experience. But I want to, Dede, like, what is it about this movie that resonates so strongly with you?
There's just something about, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Adam said. Like, the plot is very strange, and the whole, like, oh, the fiance shows up with a different guy. Like, it doesn't make sense. Also, I know we've mentioned a couple times that Igor is named Fritz. Frankenstein is not named Victor in this. That's his friend's name.
Right. I know, that really confused me, that the friend was named Victor, and I was like, wait, what is this? I had that moment of like, am I completely misremembering this? Like, is the guy that I think is Frankenstein, is he not Frankenstein? Is this going to have a switcheroo at some point? Like, that really threw me for a loop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think a lot of the things that I do like about this might be the things that Adam doesn't like. Like, I love the theatricality. Like, I love how over the top some of the acting is. It just, for some reason, really works for me in a situation where, like, the stakes are so high. And, like, rewatching it this past time, like, I forgot and got to be reminded how much I love, like, how the father keeps toasting to a son for the House of Frankenstein. And every time he does that, Henry's face just, like, twitches. Like, he is like, oh shit, I'm doing procreation wrong. Like, his just, I love just how grand it is in terms of, like, the themes. Like, it uses a bunch of the shorthand. Also, the brain procuring scene is way funnier than I remember it. Like, he like that skeleton on the string, and like him being like, oh, this one's fine. Like, it's not totally that different than the one from Young Frankenstein, except for the fact that we don't have Marty and his like bugging eyes, you know, along the menu of different brains available there.
No, that's true. Like, that was, again, it bumped for me because I was like, oh, like, that is such a clear, ripped right out of this movie, and let's just sort of dial it up a little bit. But like you said, it was like, it's funny, and that was so unexpected.
Right. There's sort of an impression that these movies, oh, of course, it takes itself 100% seriously. But I think James Whale definitely knows that, like, there is like a fun to this, that,
he's,
you know,
stealing a brain. Like,
yeah. And it's just like, there's a lot of shorthand, and and there's confusion, mix-ups. Like, it's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, and there is that, like, the scene with him and the little girl, like, there is just such a mirroring of innocence there that for some reason that just, like, really gets me. Again, the whole, like, the monster isn't the monster in terms of, like, how to define a monster in a horror film. The monster is just this innocent blank slate that is used for Dr. Frankenstein to project all of his weird issues with procreation and God and just about everything you could possibly list that would lead to him being an incel if he were available today. Like, it's just like all of that stuff, the cumulative nature of it just makes me really entranced by it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think the thing that I was feeling was that the first chunk of this movie is very slow. And I think it's partly because I don't find the human characters all that interesting. And particularly the melodrama of, like, their love lives and all of these sorts of things. But the second that Boris Karloff shows up, I'm like, oh, I'm just, like, locked in. I can't stop looking at this. And I think so much of the horror of this movie, for me, was the feeling of, like, you're watching this creature that clearly has a spark of intelligence, right? Like the first scene where you see him come out in the full makeup and everything, and he's like interacting with Dr. Frankenstein, and the doctor's telling him what to do and all this sort of stuff, and then he shows him the sun, and Karloff's like acting of kind of like gently reaching up towards the sun, and then the doctor takes it away, right? In that moment, you see that the monster has intelligence and a yearning for the light, however you want to interpret what that means, but the light. And then the doctor kind of like cruelly takes it away without even thinking about like what it means in that moment. Mm-hmm. And so much of this movie for me was actually like trying to empathize with being in the shoes of the monster, of like, imagine if you, a person with intelligence and emotions, was trapped in a body where you are not able to communicate with the people around you, and you're not able to connect with the people you want to connect with. And instead, you're whipped and burned and imprisoned. And then like the thing that you fear the most happens to you at the end, right? Like, to me, that's the horror of this movie. And the thing that, like, once we got on that track, I find it amazing to watch. I do think it's genuinely an amazing performance. And obviously, you know, I mean, I'm not saying anything new here. The performance is amazing. The makeup's amazing. The monster's amazing. There's a reason why the monster becomes iconic. But that was my experience of it. Like, on Letterboxd, I logged this as like a 4.5 out of 5. And that's despite the fact that, like, the first, like, 30 minutes of this, I'm like, oh, this is a little rocky. And then it just had me for the rest of it. So...
Yeah,
I'm glad.
You know, just going back to the like that tagline: pounds with drama, burns with passion, startles with thrills, shocks with surprise. I don't think the film pays off in that regard. Like, I don't.
I would agree with that.
The marketing of this is really marketing this as being this like terrifying piece of horror. Even the friggin' prologue: be prepared, I'm gonna scare the pants off of you. Like, I think maybe there's some existential fear here of like, oh yeah, the you know, being the monster and the monster's fear of fire, and he dies by the flame. And again, part of this is that it's a 80-year-old movie, but like nothing in this movie is scary to me. If I maybe put myself in the shoes of the monster, I could see there's some fear there, but it's not even like, you know,
but the
at least
monster's
some
not
of those,
scary.
The monster's not scary, and like there's not a lot of horror in that regard for me. So I think that's also what I'm bumping up against. Like, even the hokier Dracula stuff or Wolfman stuff, it's like, okay, well, yeah, like that if you're in the shoes of being attacked by this monster, that's scary. But like, there's not even that for me. So maybe that's part of what I'm bumping against.
The one thing I think it might not ever deliver on is passion. Like,
yeah. Totally.
You know, Henry Frankenstein certainly is passionate about his studies and his creation, but Henry and Elizabeth's relationship, like, it every time it takes me a beat to be like, wait, who's getting married here?
Right.
Because not only do they barely share the screen, they have no chemistry whatsoever.
Totally.
So, I don't know. I think it's funny that they'd be like, passion. I'm like, this is like, I mean, the monster kind of goes to Elizabeth's room, which would have been super risque back then. But like, yeah, this is not a romance.
No.
Yeah. We have a little
Not
bit of
at
that in the next one, but this one is not. I'm like, did they just tack that in there and think no one would notice?
Maybe it was just like the expectations. I mean, it's in the book, but also like maybe it was just like, you know, well, you got to have a romance, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of almost have a wedding, but yeah.
I was going to say, I think a lot of what I bump against is just the text just feels incomplete to me. It's interesting. I started watching the film with commentary the other day. And I ran out of time so I can finish it. But in it, they point out that when you get to the, like, when you're looking at the credits, there's like 4 different writers credited, because there's obviously the original author of the book, there's the author of the play, there's scenarios by, and then there's one other credit, which I think is like the screen. So it's like you're distilling this through so many different layers that I feel like, again, it just feels like something's lost in this translation. And it's interesting too, because obviously we talked in the Bram Stoker's Dracula episode about how what everybody associates with Dracula is actually not the text. It's coming from this play that was really famous at the time. And so the idea that this one is similar, that it's like, it's not necessarily taking from the text, it's taking from a famous play adaptation of the text and then distilling that, and we got to take this stuff out because it's 1931 and that's too risque, or that's not, you know, we're going to get censored and all that. There were so many elements that I am interested in and I think are interesting, but they're just missing. It's like there's linking pieces and missing pieces that on the whole just makes the film feel kind of like disjointed and not resonating with me for whatever reason. And it's not like I'm expecting it to spell everything out for me. I guess I'm just disappointed. Like, I wanted to like this a lot more than I did. And I come away from it just being, like, impressed by the craft that's on display. But just, yeah, like, it didn't resonate with me emotionally in a way that I kind of thought that it should. And, like, what you guys are describing, I'm like, yeah, that all makes sense. Why didn't I feel any of this? Like, I just was sort of like, the moments that struck me are obviously the moment with the little girl, and then the father coming through the town with the little girl. Like, those things resonated with me. And again, you know, being a father, of course it does. And that hits much different now than it did when I watched this in 2010 with my roommate. The thing that really bothered me, and it's funny because we talked about this in King Kong, was just the soundtrack or lack thereof. Like, the fact that, for me, this movie feels so lifeless because there's no score. The sound effects are so diegetic to the point of, like, it's like, if there's a visual and it aligns with that visual, like lightning or whatever, like, that, you're going to get a sound effect for that, but there's no sort of, like, atmosphere or life coming out of that. Which, again, I understand that's the nature of, like, 1931 filmmaking. In that commentary, they specifically say it's not uncommon for movies of this period to only have music during the opening titles and the closing titles and nothing else. But I think of other movies that I've seen that are of a similar age, like a Hitchcock movie. Like, those movies feel tense to me, and they don't feel this sort of lifelessness that, again, this is a horror movie. Like, and I guess I'm just like, where's all of the horror stuff that I'm just used to seeing as a result of this? And, like, we talked about Hammer, and, like, you know, yeah, those movies maybe they lean on the scale a little too much. You know, Nate, we've talked about this before. The thing that you think is pulling you out of the movie isn't. It's actually something that happened 20 minutes earlier. And maybe that's part of it. It's just like, from the jump, because of the beautiful visual language that has this, like, German expressionism feeling to it, I wanted it to have more of that tone that you get from later films. And that's unfair, obviously, to compare this to those things. But I don't know. It's just like that immediately bumps for me of, like, I like the theatricality, Dede, but it's almost like there are these theatrical elements that feel like they're missing as a result of that. It's like they're not leaning enough into that, or I don't know. Again, I don't know what it is. I just it's strange to me how much this movie left me cold. I really wasn't expecting that.
I don't feel that the same way about the sound as you do on this one. I feel like it's very different than King Kong for me, like, in terms of that feeling of, like, it feels too silent, or like the soundscape is incomplete. And I think it's maybe because of where the setting is. King Kong is in a jungle and then in a big city, right? And so you're like, where's the soundscape? Whereas this is, like, in rooms mostly. And so I think maybe that's part of why it doesn't bother me. But also, like, there are these beautiful silent moments where you are just watching, again, mostly watching Karloff do his thing. It's like dance, you know, almost, but I guess without the music. So I don't know. For me, that didn't bother me, but I do wonder if it's just, for me, again, like, the beginning of this is very slow, and the stakes of the emotional relationships between the main characters isn't totally working for me. And usually I think that would make it very hard for me to get through a movie, but for whatever reason, this movie, it reboots for me. The second where the monster is alive, it's like a hard reset, and it's like I'm in a different movie. And I do kind of wonder, like, this is all speculation, but, like, is this just because Whale doesn't really care about the secondary human relationships, and he really wants to be telling the monster story? You know, and so it's sort of like a yada yada of, like, you know, yeah, and of course there's a romantic relationship, of course, you know, that has to happen. And I don't know. What do you think, Dede?
Yeah, I'm glad you have brought up a couple times now, Nate, Karloff's performance, because of course it's, like, one of the best parts. And if anything, for me, it's one of the less theatrical elements, because it is so restrained and, like, contemplative, and, like, him just having, like, a moment with the light, or, like, a moment looking around, like you get the impression of how much humanity there is inside of him, and then the contrast with how little humanity there is inside the doctor. Like, I find that really interesting. And as much as I think this ending is abrupt, I'm happy that the film didn't chew off too much more of the book's plot. Because I do think it would have just been like overly complicating itself. So even though it is mostly taking from that play, I do think that the contained version of, I just wish they had like another scene or something to end it rather than the father just being like, let me drink his wine and then it's over.
Yeah, that epilogue is really quite something. I mean, I think it would have been better without it. Just end with the fire at the windmill and Frankenstein being injured and the monster may be dead. Like, just leave it there. I think that was probably enough.
I agree. And also, like, this is more of a note about adaptations, but have you guys read the book, The Never-Ending Story? And I'm assuming you've seen the film.
Seen the film. I've never read the book, actually.
Okay, so the book is actually absolutely incredible. It's a kid's book. You can fly through it in like a weekend if you don't have children like me. But the book itself, the film is about an adaptation of about the first third of the book. Like, and it's very loyal to that. It's like, you know, what's happening on whatever world this is. And then Sebastian names the princess, saves the planet, and then they get to start rebuilding. The last 2/3 of the book of that are entirely rebuilding the world and him just showing up and be like with that grain of sand that it was able to save and being like, okay, let's make this world. And it is so fascinating. But I always kind of think of that as an example of like, don't try and do the whole book. Because if they'd tried to do the whole book, it would have made absolutely no sense. It also makes the sequels make even less sense. But but yeah, so I do respect the film for not going beyond anything else and not becoming overly complicated, because it is a pretty simple plot.
Right. And I totally agree. And I think, you know, again, this is not a disparaging comparison, but when I think about the Guillermo del Toro way of going about it, it's like the doctor character is incredibly fleshed out in the new version, right? And has a lot of motivation that is spelled out through exposition. And the 1931 version is just like, yeah, we're not really going to get into that too much. And again, to me, that actually helps the horror element. It's like, we don't need an explanation about like why he is the way he is too much. And same, I mean, especially with Fritz. Fritz is just a cruel bastard, right? And it's like, we don't know anything about Fritz. He's just there. And what it means is that like Frankenstein's interaction with humans is just like, they're just cruel. You know, it's just they're cruel because they're cruel. And to me, that is scarier. Whereas I think the Del Toro version's more romantic.
I do wonder, though, and I just hearing you guys talk about all this, it's interesting. I have not read the book. And I do wonder if maybe what I'm bumping up against is that I am unable to fill in some of the blanks in a way that both of you maybe are, because you have the full knowledge of the full text. Even if it's something you've read many years ago, but you have that full sort of context. Whereas someone like me, who's literally taking the film only at face value, because that's all I have to work with, maybe that's also part of what's bumping with me. I don't know. Like, I can't assume that everybody who saw this movie in 1930, like, they had seen the play or read the book or whatever, though clearly it was an iconic piece of literature at the time, so maybe a little bit. But this is discussions that I've had about other texts, you know, not to bring it back to musical theater, but like Jesus Christ Superstar hits a lot different in the 70s when the Bible was something that everybody had read and everybody had context for, versus 50 years later where like we're a much more agnostic society and don't necessarily have all those pieces to fill in the blanks. And people are like, this show's really thin, there's no plot. And it's like, well, no, there is. It's just the expectation was you're going to fill in the plot for yourself. So I do wonder if maybe that's part of it for me, but like, I don't know. I'm trying to find some solution here for me, but I do think that maybe that text thing, maybe that is part of it. It's just like that I don't have the full context to be able to paper over the missing pieces. I don't know.
Not only do Nate and I have like the context of the book, but also like a lot of my feelings about it now are based on like, you know, 40 years of admiration of the film. And it's not that I can't see the holes, it's that they don't bother me necessarily as much.
Right.
And I do think that one thing, like, audiences back then probably found this horribly terrifying. And I think a lot of it might have been like, I'm surrounded by electricity right now. Like, there are electric cars. Like, I think the relationship in our society between us and science has changed so drastically, where it's like Dracula, like I'm still kind of like not actually scared because they're not real, but like vampires and werewolves, like I cannot control things that are magical. Those are fantastical and they are outside of the realm of my world, and good God, that means I won't be able to control them if they come to me. They might have felt the same way about science back then, and this version of that. So even though like I watch it now and all I do is I feel for the monster, and I think Frankenstein's such a jerk, the doctor. I mean, of course, different cultures take in films in a different way, but I'm just trying to think of like these people had like cars for maybe 20 years in their city, let alone,
Well, it's funny that I think now we joked about it, but like, in a way, the Simpsons version of a megalomaniac billionaire creates a robot to be the perfect worker.
Right.
Kind of resonates a little bit more with a modern audience and is maybe a little bit scarier because, like, reanimating the dead, that's never going to happen. But AI, robots, human beings, thoughts and feelings being put into it.
To Dede's point, though, like, that might have been where we were when this movie came out, was like, that's what that would have felt like.
No, absolutely.
Like,
absolutely.
You know, it's kind of the equivalent of being like an AI-based horror movie or like, you know, an evil billionaire like has a scheme to make humans more efficient, or that might be the analog now, I guess.
Yeah, well, you're describing what happens with the Christoph Waltz character in the Guillermo del Toro one, where he basically wants to chappy himself and have his brain uploaded into another body. But that is a different thing to think about when it comes to the reanimation of the dead. Like, what happens if death stops working?
Interesting.
Totally. Yeah, we're getting into like Black Mirror territory.
Oh, yeah.
I now feel like I have to go see the Guillermo version just to be like, okay, well, now comparing it, not necessarily comparing the two films, but comparing at least how it handles the text and how it handles the adaptation, and maybe I will like that one more, even though it sounds like it's a little more heavy-handed, but and does we have to have way too much exposition and explaining the reasons why people are, which I do kind of hate in movies, but I'll be curious to see if it resonates more because it has a little bit more of that, for lack of a better term, it's a little more fleshed out.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Adam, so have your feelings changed, or when you watched this like 20 years ago with your roommate Brad, was it the same feeling?
Again, this is the funny thing, Dede, is that I know I've seen this movie before, but it has never had any lasting impact on me outside of just like the iconography of it. It's not something like, I think it was our first season when we talked about The Exorcist. Like, that was a movie that had this lasting impact on me from the first time I saw it and subsequently, and I've grown to appreciate different elements of it, but like just never could stop thinking about it. As I said, I remember little bits and pieces from it from when I had previously seen it. Like, I basically felt like I was seeing it for the first time again this time, outside of the two moments of the little girl and the credit of the question mark. And then the It's Alive, which you've seen like in every clip show ever.
Yes.
Like, those are the three takeaways that I remembered. Everything else, it was like I was seeing it for the first time. So despite having seen it multiple times, it's left no real impression on me for whatever reason.
Interesting. So this film has very clearly left a huge impression on me, but as someone who was raised in a 0% religious household, The Exorcist, the first time I saw it, I was like, this is the scariest movie ever. What's wrong with people?
Right, for sure.
Like, it had that. I have seen it many, many times. I appreciate it, but I have no fear of the devil or God in those terms. But I'm afraid of science, because science for me is very real and very possible. So not that God isn't real. Let's not get into that. But you know what I mean? Like,
no, totally. Yeah. I mean, Nate and I we have the same sort of relationship in that we're both a-religious, and to me, it's not the religious stuff that I find terrifying about that movie. And again, being a father now, my relationship to The Exorcist is very different as a parent than it was as a teenager.
Right. All the stuff in that about like there's something wrong with your child and you're trying to figure out what's wrong with them, and medical science is not helping, and it's also terrifying because they're just like putting them in giant machines and poking and prodding them. Like, that's the stuff that definitely freaks me out the most about that movie. And then the exorcism stuff is kind of like, oh, neat.
yeah. This is impressive. Well, before we move on, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you guys wanted to cover?
I had one thing that kind of comes back to your point, Adam, about like the pop culture sort of like diffusion of this movie as well. Mm-hmm. But why is Frankenstein green? It's a black and white movie, right? Mm-hmm. And I dug into this. I found it fascinating.
Yeah.
So apparently, when you're shooting in black and white, they had a whole system for how colors translate into black and white. They kind of create different tones of gray. It's interesting that you wouldn't just use gray paint. No, you had to use colors to make it look right. So they actually used green grease paint on the monster in order to make him look the right shade of gray in the movie. Now, the interesting thing is that when they did the posters, they used the color version of the monster. So even the early promotional materials about Frankenstein, maybe even that poster I was talking about with Bela Lugosi, the monster is green.
Yeah, and I was going to say the poster, I feel like he's green. So
yeah, that's like how that sort of starts to diffuse into pop culture, is this grease paint decision for black and white film, and then just the decision to use that color in the promotional material is basically, it seems like, how Frankenstein got green. And now, like, that's just such an iconic part of the monster.
Yeah. Which is interesting because green is famously, and this is probably why they used it. Like, I am not a cinematographer, but I know from research and stuff, green translates really weird in black and white, which famously in Spielberg's Schindler's List, he removed all green. Like, none of the costumes, there could be no green on set because it just looks so ugly on film. And he was like, I can't have that distracting the audience's eye at any point. So that film, again, you never see it, but famously, like, there is no green in any sequence, or had it been shot in color, there would have been no green. But clearly, like, it gives this sort of lifeless, dead
pale
flesh
look.
attack. Yeah, so that's really interesting, yeah.
And Pierce, used it in Dracula as well. So there you go. So that's where he originally did it, and then he ported it over to this movie as well.
Interesting. Thank you for that. I had no idea.
Well, that's going to bring us to the segment we like to call the Simpsons Speed Round. Now, Dede, I don't think we did this with you last year. This is a newer segment for us. So we're going to go through a couple questions. Feel free to weigh in if you have one. If you don't, that's totally fine too. Between Nate and I, hopefully we can cover all our bases. But let's start our Simpsons Speed Round. Are there any moments in this movie that feel like Simpsons jokes but aren't? I have one, which is when the monster growls at Elizabeth in her wedding dress. It has a very sort of drunk Homer, like, which again, I think they make ample use of in Young Frankenstein, but it was one of those moments where, like, I actually kind of like burst out laughing, and I don't think it's intentionally funny, but the association with Young Frankenstein, and again, being like, oh, that sounds like something Homer would do, like to Maude when he's sloshed. It felt very Simpsons-y to me.
Yeah.
That part is hilarious. I think for me, other than the humor of like the skeleton on the like bouncy string when he's going to get the brain, that whole scene is just like slapstick in my mind. Yeah. Would be the Baron won't stop talking about wine. And it kind of feels like this weird, like, Mr. Burns thing where he's just like, oh, the servants should have champagne. They're not going to appreciate this. Like, and it's just like, he's giving all of his villagers beer. He's actually sharing a drink with his servants. Like, he could be painted as a good guy right now. And they make a point to include the fact that he's just like, oh, well, these peasants don't even appreciate good wine. And then he keeps talking the entire end of the film. That weird little epilogue is wine-based. And it just seems like one of those weird things that they might have, like, Homer get really hyper-focused on, or Mr. Burns would, like, make sure that Smithers gets a different drink than him or something.
Yeah, totally.
Yes. I had Dr. Frankenstein saying, "I'm astonishingly sane, Doctor." That's just a great line.
Did you learn anything about The Simpsons from this movie? For me, it was the thing that I immediately sort of grokked. And again, it's probably more a trope thing, but the angry mob scene at the end, like, again, this isn't the first movie to do an angry mob. I mean, like, the Lon Chaney Phantom of the Opera has an angry mob at the end. But for whatever reason, the iconography of this felt like something out of The Simpsons. And I believe it's the Simpsons movie has that, like, really sweeping shot through an angry mob that feels like it has to be a direct reference to this.
Yeah,
So-
the torches in particular, I think I feel like are a thing that it's so related to this movie because they're marching at night and they have the torches. And I feel like the idea of a torch wielding mob is maybe at the very least accentuated by this movie, you know, like, and the Simpsons do actually parody it directly too in, I think it's one of the Treehouse of Horrors. They do like a Munsters style opening with all the characters coming out front of the house, but then an angry mob wielding torches comes in and beats them up. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And I want to say, because I'm still watching current episodes of The Simpsons that are on now. It's and there's one episode so far this season that has an angry mob with pitchforks and torches. So I'm like, even if it's not a Treehouse of Horror, it's a very robust.
It's a very
image.
Simpsons. They love an angry mob mentality. It's
they do, and we
definitely
love
DNA.
Yeah, and we love seeing random background characters just show up. Like if you're gonna have like an angry mob and like Disco Stew's in there, like I'm in.
Yeah,
I don't care what you're protesting.
It's so good.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good answer.
And I think they're still doing the red curtain, like person coming out warning people opening in the Treehouse of Horror this season too. So there you go. Yeah, I had, we didn't really talk about this that much, but I do feel like Bart has a bit of a Frankenstein's monster energy in the same way of like the episodes that tug at the heartstrings the most with Bart are like, he's like trapped in this situation where people don't understand him or he doesn't know how to get out of it. And that sort of feeling of disconnection is, I feel like, the emotional engine of Bart's character often, in the same way that the monster is in this movie.
And they have very similarly shaped heads.
That too. Maybe Bart also had the top of his skull chopped off to
there you go.
A brain put in.
Does this movie still have some juice for more Simpsons parodies? I said the story, maybe, yes, or at least like the idea of Frankenstein as a whole, yes. I don't necessarily think this film adaptation necessarily does. Although, like, maybe the chucking the little girl in the lake, I could see that being something that they reference in, hopefully, in a Treehouse of Horror. But you never, like, it's The Simpsons. They could do that in a regular episode, and you also wouldn't bat an eye. Maybe not as an act of murder, but you know what I mean. That moment I could see them pulling from, but
I could see someone carrying a body or an empty case of beer or something through the village, like the father holding the dead daughter.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Holding a keg that's been wounded.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of said probably not. I mean, except for the parts that are already part of the DNA, like we were just talking about, that are just like, they're going to keep doing those ones. But beyond that, I kind of feel like this is done. Like they've hit most of the key things. I like those shoutouts though. Those were both good little moments that I could see them riffing on.
Are there any characters in this movie that could become a recurring Simpsons side character? Nate, what do you think?
I said Baron Frankenstein.
I'm in Baron.
Yeah,
Baron
I think that's
100%.
the obvious answer. So
yeah. He actually reminded me a bit. There's a scene where he's kind of dressed in his like house coat and has a funny hat on, and he was reminding me of Homer in this episode with his fez.
Totally. Are there any other movies by this director or in this franchise that The Simpsons should parody? Again, I sort of said they kind of did because, as we discussed, like the sequels actually are really a source of a lot of the parodies, not actually the original film. So, I guess I would say no in that they've already kind of done that. But I don't know, maybe Abbott and Costello meet The Simpsons. That could be an interesting crossover, but.
Yeah, and they've already done Bride. Like, I'm sure they referenced it in costume, if not plot.
Yeah, I was thinking Bride because like Marge's hair is obviously inspired by Bride of Frankenstein, even originally, and they've referenced that in the Halloween episodes. But like, I don't know if they've done a plot version of it, and if not, then that could be good. Like the whole beat with like the blind man teaching the monster, the actual creation of the bride, like all of that stuff could maybe get in there.
Totally. Yeah, or making a way for Homer, like that sort of thing.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, on that note, that's going to bring us to our final verdicts. I mean, I think I know where you guys are going to land, but do the strengths outweigh the weaknesses? Would you recommend this film? Dede, we'll start with you.
I mean, yes.
Yeah, clearly.
Yes, very, very, very much so, yes.
Nate?
we phrase our verdict question as, do the strengths outweigh the weaknesses for a reason? Because every film has weaknesses. And I think this is like a perfect example where it's like, there are things about this movie that I think are weaknesses. But for me, the strengths definitely outweigh them, because there are periods of this movie where I can't look away from the screen and I just like totally invested in what's happening. And I think the craft of both the performances, the makeup, which we didn't talk that much about, but like amazing makeup, unfortunately very hard on the actor from what I've heard. But like the makeup and then, the production design that you were talking about, Adam, that sort of German expressionist inspired production design, it just all comes together into something that I can't stop watching. And so for those periods of the film alone, the strengths outweigh the weaknesses for me. Adam?
I mean, again, we phrase this in a very specific way. For me, the weaknesses outweighed the strengths, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't recommend it. I think, obviously, this is a key text in the history of horror cinema itself, and a key text to understanding sort of, as we've said, like parody and where this character comes from. Even if it's understanding that all of the things you associate with this character aren't necessarily from this movie. I think that is worth unpacking and discovering. So I would recommend it. But for me, I think the weaknesses outweighed the strengths. And obviously, like, my issues with the movie and my lack of enjoyment comes from that. But I do think it's an important text that is worth exploring and worth unpacking like we did.
Adam, on that note, what would you recommend maybe instead of this movie or as a double feature with it?
Well, obviously, like I've mentioned it a bunch, like Young Frankenstein, I think especially if you're a fan of The Simpsons, like you have to see that film. I love it. Granted, I haven't seen it in probably a decade, but I loved it as a kid. Mel Brooks is hilarious. I love his style of humor because, again, can be very silly and slapsticky, but like he also is a genius and like has nuance and layers, and like, Blazing Saddles is a hilarious parody of Westerns, but it's also a commentary on race. Like, his films are actually remarkably layered if you want to peel back and look past the wacky gags and Marty Feldman's bulging eyes. I don't know that Young Frankenstein is necessarily one of those movies, but I think he's a brilliant filmmaker, so I'd recommend that. But also, and I kind of forgot about this, National Theatre Live did an incredible production of Frankenstein. It would have been like at least 10 years ago, where it was Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller, and they rotated who played Frankenstein and who played the monster. And so I saw that when it was in theaters originally, because that was when I was like super big into Benedict Cumberbatch. It was like right after Sherlock had come out. It was directed by Danny Boyle of 28 Days Later. And I thought it was really interesting. I remember really liking it. I haven't seen it since. But the nice thing is that National Theatre has a streaming service now where you can, if you can't get out to the cinema to see the live sort of simulcast of these plays, you can enjoy them from the comfort of your own home. And I'm pretty sure for the longest time they didn't have Frankenstein, but I think they recently did add it, and you can pick which version you want to see, if you want to see Benedict Cumberbatch as the monster or Johnny Lee Miller as the monster. So yeah, I would recommend that. It's just another play adaptation. It's much more related to the text, to the original text, I think, than obviously this is. It's a fascinating watch. I would recommend people check that out if they can. What about you, Nate?
I was thinking about this. We were talking about like the horror of technology, right? And I think the movie that sort of tapped into the same energy for me is The Fly. I was thinking 1986 version in particular, which I really love. It's like, what if Frankenstein, but he's also the monster?
Yeah.
Right? And so I just love that movie. I think it's great horror, really scary, but also taps into a lot of the same themes as this, I think. It's just that, you are combining the characters. So like, what if the doctor loses his humanity and loses the ability to connect? I have two non-movie recommendations too. There's a fun board game called Mother of Frankenstein, which I would highly recommend. If you like old-fashioned adventure video games where you're like trying to solve a mystery, it's kind of like playing that, but with multiple players. It's a collaborative board game. And you're basically following Mary Shelley through the writing of Frankenstein, but it's, fictionalized as well. It's a fun game and a good puzzle.
Cool.
So Love that.
That's super cool.
And then one last shout out. My barbershop is actually Universal Monster themed. It's called
cool.
True Believers Barbershop in New Hope, Pennsylvania. It's awesome. The guys who work there are fantastic, and they have the classic monster movie posters up on the wall. So shout out to True Believers.
That's super cool.
Dede, what about you?
There's so many things, like Bride, of course, any of the other Hammer films. I mean, one of the big tragedies for this film for me is like the monster is an unwilling participant. Like, he didn't ask for this. He kind of gets thrust into it. And that is one of the more upsetting parts about this for me. And that combined kind of leads me to Wolfman. Like the OG, like we're talking Lon Chaney Jr., also Bela Lugosi, because we can't get rid of that guy, nor should we try to. But that film, as silly as it is and as boisterous as that character is, as a human, it really gets down to the whole, like, I don't want this. Like, it's just the horror of waking up the next morning and having to realize you killed people or something to that effect. I think that in terms of, like, showing how monsters can have so much humanity and really care is the part that I really like. So, yeah.
That's
Love
super
that.
cool.
Yeah.
What about the Del Toro version? Would you recommend people check that out?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. I would recommend people to check it out, especially if you like Del Toro stuff. His stuff is just so over the top. I'm happy. I haven't always loved his films, even though I always love him. But this one feels like a slight return to form in terms of like Crimson Peak rather than necessarily Nightmare Alley, which we can all not talk about again.
Yeah, that's maybe for the best. I mean, yeah, like literally the nicest man I have ever met. And
oh my God.
so humble and accommodating and kind and generous and
a great champion for film. And
I mean, if nothing else, an honorary Torontonian. So if for nothing else, just like supporting that guy, I'm all for. So
you could go watch the behind the scenes and see the giant ship built in a parking lot in Toronto.
Exactly.
You could like see the CN Tower and then just the big ship in the Arctic. But yeah, I think it's awesome. And again, if you have some of the hangups that Adam has about the 1931 movie, it probably actually addresses a lot of those for you because it's a much more complete story. It's more plotty than this movie. And more interested, I guess, in the human characters, perhaps. It's a good complement, right? It's just a very different approach to the story.
Totally. Well, on that note, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Springfield Googleplex, the movie podcast for Simpson fans. And Dede, thank you so much for coming back for the third time. Like I said, 2 more times and you get a jacket. In the meantime, is there anything that you want to plug?
No, not right now. I'm on a miniature hiatus from reviewing, which means that I just feel bad about writing, but taking the time to do it, but I'm still writing about the same amount to work on a larger project, which will come to light soon. But I still post all of the links to stuff that I write at my Blue Sky right now, which is Dede Crimmins. So yeah, if you want to hunt me down there, that's where you can find me.
Well, thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it. It's always nice to have you here to give us the context that we so sorely lack sometimes.
Right. I'm going to turn you guys into horror fans.
Experts. So. Well, I mean, I do really like horror. I wouldn't say like I'm an expert or anything, but I do. That's the reality is like horror is such a broad genre, right? So there are pockets of it that are more my vibe and less my vibe. But
and I'm coming around partly through this podcast. I feel like because
I think we're going to win you over. So and to our listeners, thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave us a review and share this episode with the Simpson fans and film buffs in your life. We've also set up a support page on our website where if you want, you can throw us a couple of bucks to help cover the cost of making this show. And until next time, Nate,
we'll see you around the Plex.
Perfect. There we go. 2 hours and 20 minutes, which is what, double the runtime of the film?
Yeah, pretty much exactly.
Yeah, still not as long as Del Toro.
That's true.
Yeah, well, I know. That is, honestly, that is the one thing that is kind of keeping me from wanting to see it, but I think if I go to see it in a theater, I'll be okay.
It mostly doesn't feel like that long.
No,
I think it's like it keeps it moving, you know.
It doesn't also good. Like is like a lot of it is told in flashback, so that kind of makes it be like, okay, I know where the end is going, or at least where we're going to end up. So it's a little more riveting in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
at least I find it that way.
Sort of adjacent. Did either of you end up seeing Nosferatu? I'm assuming you did, Dede, but I don't know if Nate did. Did you see Nosferatu?
No.
Yeah.
I just heard from everyone that it was super gross. That's...
My problem was I saw it the day I came down with hand, foot, and mouth disease, and so 20 minutes into the movie, I spiked a fever, and halfway through finally said, I have to get out of here because I am literally shivering.
Because I'm literally transforming into Nosferatu?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, no.
So I haven't actually finished the movie, but the 4K was on sale a couple weeks ago, and so I did buy it, and eventually we'll go back and revisit it, but... Yeah. What I saw, I didn't find particularly gross necessarily, but
No.
I'd be very curious to get Nate's read on it because I feel like it's I don't know. You might be into it, but maybe not.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm just gonna stop.